We are now in part 3 of the endocrine system, and I was interrupted because I ran out of time in looking at the relationship between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary, known as Neuro Hypothesis. So up here we have a population of cells, another population over here, and in each case we notice that the axon from each of these neurons, whose cell bodies are up here, the axons are actually going to come down this way, which means that the neurotransmitters will proceed down. Let's take a look here again. We're going through the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract, right? And so this is actually a part of the infundibulum. Notice that the axon terminals end here in a capillary bed. These terminals right here will then contain the molecules of interest. And so we see here axon terminal, and this is the posterior lobe. And who is in these terminals now? We're going to be having oxytocin and ADH. So one of these will be storing oxytocin. Another one will be storing ADH. And when the levels are low here in the blood, there will be a release into the blood of these two molecules, oxytocin and ADH. And this is the neuro hypothesis. Okay, so that's one format. Then we move on to the anterior aspect of the pituitary. So same organ, but it's the anterior lobe. The anterior lobe goes by the name adenohypophysis. So the pituitary itself is sometimes referred to as the hypophysis. Neurohypothesis, adenohypophysis, posterior, anterior lobe. Okay, here we have this alphabet soup here of molecules: growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, prolactin. So we're going to be having populations of cells that produce those molecules. This is a capillary bed here representing those molecules. Up here we have populations of cells that are going to be stimulating and releasing factors. And so up here we have their sort of little alphabet soup here, in which we have a growth hormone releasing factor, another one called the inhibiting factor. Okay, we have a thyroid releasing hormone, etc. So we're going to be having molecules that can either stimulate or inhibit the molecules we were just looking at down here. And how do they do that? Basically, these are neurons that are delivering their neurotransmitters, these molecules as hormones, to a capillary bed. This is capillary bed number 1. This is capillary bed number 2. Whenever we have a 1 and a 2, we have something that we call a portal system. And so here we have the discussion here of that. We have a hypophyseal portal system. Take a look at that. Hypophyseal portal system. Okay. And what's being pointed to here is this entire network where we drop the molecules from up here into this bloodstream. They travel down a venous system here, a portal vein, and they end up in this capillary bed number 2 and are released. We only see this a couple of different places. Another place where we see this is when we absorb food from the small and large intestines, and it ends up at the liver right before it goes back to the heart. So in a similar situation here, we have a portal system. So in this portal system, we have these extra molecules that are helping out with the stimulation and inhibition of these molecules. Okay, and that completes that story right there. Then we press on to consider individual players within that, and we begin with growth hormone. We're actually looking here at page 602. There's a table that summarizes it, but I would like to go over these individually one at a time. And so there are direct actions, the growth hormone, and I would like to momentarily digress here for a moment and indicate to you a little arrangement. So I would like to have you sense that it's possible to have and it's something that I learned about personally when I was a medical student and attending small groups with internal medicine doctors, and I began to have to absorb their language. They had something that's referred to as the daytime cocktail. And they had another that was referred to as the nighttime cocktail. And by day, we wake up and we have epinephrine. And by having epinephrine, we visited previously the sympathetic nervous system, and we have muscle tone. That's the purpose of epinephrine initially, is to provide adequate muscle tone. We end up getting out of bed and carrying on with our day. Before we awaken, we have only parasympathetic tone, and oftentimes we're waking out of a dream in which our muscles are quite literally paralyzed due to the nature of rapid eye movement sleep and dreaming. The next thing that we need to consider here is that when you do elevate the epinephrine through exercise, you're also increasing thyroxine. As you elevate the epinephrine from the exercise, you eventually conclude your exercise, epinephrine declines, but the thyroxine actually stays elevated to some degree throughout the day and the next night. Okay, so that increases the metabolic rate of the body. And then we have insulin. We have insulin because we break our fast, called breakfast. Okay, so we take on food, and as the nutrients circulate in the blood, insulin is released, and we take up the nutrients into the cells. The nighttime cocktail is predominated by growth hormone. And as we'll see, there's also the attendant liver somatomedins, or sometimes called liver growth factors. The liver makes over 300 varieties of growth factors for the 300 varieties of tissues. And the growth factors become resident in the tissues and act at that level locally. The next thing is that we need guidance, and so we have something called cortisol. And the cortisol is providing glucose for nighttime activities, and also it's providing guidance, in essence. It works, actually, it has a coenzyme that works with it called vitamin C. And then we have glucagon that also contributes glucose from stored glycogen. So actually growth, generally big time growth happens at night, particularly in the second 4 hours of sleep, although the story is set up in the first 4 hours of sleep. But the release of growth hormone in deep sleep up front and then affecting the liver and ending up getting growth factors is the next stage here. So it's important to understand daytime cocktail, nighttime cocktail. If the sleep is disturbed, we have something called disturbance of vegetative function. If you are a parent and you've watched closely the development of your child, you'll discover that children actually grow at night, and a lot of the heavy lifting of the daily cycle is a nighttime activity. It's where we build bridges, highways, infrastructure. The body itself, muscles and bone, grow at night. We are going to go from one cell to a full-on adult. By birth, we only have perhaps 6 to 8 pounds worth of flesh to work with, but by the time we're an adult, we have the full system.